All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Ayin Aleph. We're going to start on Daf Ayin Amud Beis, second to last line. We're going to be speaking about the step where the Kohen Gadol has to put on his big 11 to re-enter the Kodesh Kachim, to remove the kaf and the machta, the ladle and the kol pan. And as we learned the sugya, more brief on Daf Lamed Beis, the Gemara is going to repeat and then elaborate that which we said, that kol ha-parsha kol nemar ala seder. If you go through Achrei Mois, all of the steps that are recorded in the Chumash are following its correct chronological order, chutz mi pasuk zeh, aside of this pasuk, and we are going to be referring to pasuk chav gimel and pasuk chav daled in Perek Tzayin. If you have a Chumash, now will be a great time to open up a Chumash. We're going to go on and learn about the meeting that took place between the Ishiti, who was sent on Yom Kippur to push off the goat off the cliff, that when he came back, as we learned, he stayed in the closest sukkah to the cliff until the end of Yom Kippur. So whether this is going to be referring to Motzai Yom Kippur or Shem Hashem, the day after Yom Kippur, he would meet the Kohen Gadol, and he would tell the Kohen Gadol that I fulfill your shlichus. And with the Bachlal, it's important for a shliach to go back to the Mishaleach, to tell the Mishaleach that I did your shlichus, and we're going to find a very interesting nuance of the difference of expression, whether he saw the Kohen Gadol in public, then he would word, I did your shlichus one way, versus if he would find the Kohen Gadol in private, then he would word that I did the shlichus in a complete different way. We're going to have a little bit of a gadata over there. We're going to be learning that someone who provides, let's say, mashke for a pabrengen, now that's mamish tantamount to offering the sachem on the mizbeach, as we'll see. We're going to have a sad story with a very important lesson of a Kohen Gadol that encountered Shemaya and Avtalion, Motzoi Yom Kippur, and on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Beis, we will learn the last Mishnah in this Perek. Like we mentioned, the last Mishnah is no longer speaking about the Seder Avodah, but the last Mishnah is going to be speaking about the big day kohuna, Bachlal, that a Kohen Gadol wore Shmoyne begadim, that a Kohen Hedyot wore the 4 begadim, how the begadim and how various items in the Mishkan was made. Fascinating. We're going to learn that whenever the Torah uses the word sheish, which in the Chumash, that means linen, but we also know that there are many other words for linen. You can say pishtan, you can say butz. Sheish indicates that there are going to be 6 strands that go into each thread. Every thread used in that garment was comprised of 6 strands. Whenever the Torah uses the word mashazar, it means that every thread had 8 strands. V'chulei, v'chulei. And that's going to lead us, God willing, into the next stop, which is going to really elaborate on the detailed difference that we have between the various articles that were made, that were woven in the Mishkan, as well as the Big Day Kahuna. I would like to open up today by opening up a Chumash. Now we have these beautiful new Chumashim. Going to page 720, the synagogue edition. I wish I know how to call this. This was, I think, put out in Chabad in California. Okay. And we're going to page 720. The ikid is we're going to Perek Tzayin, and we're going through Psukim, Chav Gimel, Chav Daled, and many other Psukim, which will shed more light on this statement. Now, the literal reading of the Chumash is Uva Aharon al Oil Moed. Aaron came into the oil moed. Now, as we will see, it doesn't only mean the oil moed. It means he went into the oil moed and into the Holy of Holies. And the Chumash doesn't write what he went in there for. And then, when he went out, Ufasha the Spigdei Habad, he removed his white linen garments that he was dressed with, Asher Lavash, Bevoyela Kodesh, and the famous V'hinicham Sham, and he left these white garments there. And Pasuk Chav Daled, V'rachas es B'tzarei B'abayim, B'mokim Kodesh, V'lavash es B'godav, and the B'godav is referring to the golden garments, V'yatza v'asa es Oilase v'es Oilasa'am. This oil we spoke about in the last shiurim, it's part of the Musaf. And when we learned this on Daf Lamed Beis, as for those of us who learn, and we should all learn Chitas, Rashi writes on Pasuk Chav Gimel that really Chav Dalet happened before Chav Gimel. This is the only pasuk that's out of order. Now let's read this inside the Gemara. Again, we learned this on Daf Lamed Beis, and we're going to give a lot more details right here on Daf Ayin Aleph. So Daf Ayin Amud Beis, the second to last line by the two dots, or the Mishnah says, Kiddush Yadav and Aglov, says the Gemara. Tanach Rabbanan, we learned in a Brais, quoting beginning Pasuk Chav Gimel, Uvo Aaron El Oil Moed, that he entered the oil Moed. The Torah doesn't say what he did. So Lamahu Bo answers the Braisa, he entered Lohitzi Esakav Esamachtom. Now, by the way, when we spoke out by heart that there's a whole debate, where did the Sefer Torah come from? Those who opine, like we quoted, I think the Tosfos and Bava Basra Daf Yudalit, that the Sefer Torah that the Kohen Gadol read every year Yom Kippur was the Sefer Torah that was generally placed in the Holy of Holies. Nowhere in the Mishnah was it mentioned exactly when was it retrieved, who retrieved it. But if indeed the Sefer Torah came from the Holy of Holies, it was now that when the Kohen Gadol went in there to remove the ladle and the coal pan, when he went in there, he brought the Sefer Torah in there. And all of that is not written. We also learned to Zohar not that long ago. There are other steps and details that purposefully were omitted from the revealed part of the Torah, from Nigla. Daf Ayin Al. Says the Braisa that we should know that Shekol Aparsha Kula Nemra Allah say that even though all of the steps that we had from the beginning of Acharei Mos until here, now the literal meaning is the whole Parsha. We'll clarify that in a moment. All of that is indeed on a chronological order. Chutz the Pasuk Seh, because Pasuk Chav Daled happened prior to Pasuk Chav Gimel. In other words, the Kohen Gadol already removed the white linen garments once to put on the golden garments, to bring Oyla Seiva, Oyla Sa'am. Then he would remove the golden garments to put on the linen garments, which will be Pasuk Chav Gimel. And then obviously he would have to remove the linen garments to conclude that which was done with and to bring the Talmud Shel Beinu Arbai. Says the Gemara, my Tama. My Tama means, listen, now that we established the norm, that things are written on its chronological order, so what's the reason? How do we know? How does the Braisa know that this is out of order? So we have various approaches. Amar Rab Chizda, and this is what we learned on the Lamed Beis. True, there is nothing indicating from this pasuk that it's out of order, but we got a problem. What's the problem? Since Gemire, most people understand Gemire as halacha l'meishu misinai, that chamesh tefilla is fasari kiddushin table kohen gadol mechadash v'yayim, and v'i amrat kesidron. If we would follow everything in its chronological order, and if you open the Chumash, you know what you're going to realize? Listen, my friends, he got up in the morning and he put on the big day Zohav because he began the day like he begins every day. He would remove the big day Zohav. Now, to put on the big day Zohav, Kiddush Adayim Raglayim Mikvah. Then he would put on the big day Lavan to begin the Avodah, ultimately of bringing in the Ketores, of the Dam of the Par, the Dam of the Soir. If Pasuk Chav Gimel would be written in order, then at the end of donning his white garments for the first and only time, he would go in now. He would remove the empty, the ladle. He would remove the cooled off already coal pan, and he would put on his golden garments and Pasuk Chav Daled, and then he would finish Musaf and go into Talmud Shel Beinu Arbayim. Now that would mean that he would have to go to the mikvah 3 times. And every time you go into the mikvah, you have to be mekadosh adayim raglayim, one prior, one post. That will be 6 times. But you're not going to have the 10 times. You're not going to have the 5 mikvahs. You're only going to have 3 tefillas and 6 kedushin. So it must be that even though he already put on the big day lavan, and he already did what the Mishnah said he did, there was something that he needed to do in the big day zahav. What is that? So we are saying it's the pasuk chav dalet. Then he removed the big day zav to put back on the big day lavan to go to pasuk chav gimel to remove the kaf and the machta. Then he would remove the big day lavan to put on the golden garments, and like this you'll get to the 5 tefillas and to the 10 kedushin. So maskiv law, Rabbi Zera, if there is nothing in these verses that indicate that they are out of order, we simply have to say that even though he was already wearing the big day lavan, he would have to remove it to put on big day zav to do something. Why are you jumping to say that the something is verse 24? Chavra, if you use a chumash, it's more geshmak. As we learned in the last shiurim, there are certain steps of the avodah of Yom Kippur connected to Musaf that's written in Pinchas. It's not written here at all. It's much better to say, I get it. There was one other time that he went back and forth again. from the white to the gold, back into the white. But why are you insisting that when he went for the first time out of the white, for the second time in the gold, why do you have to say that was pasuk Chav Daled? No, leave Chav Daled after Chav Gimel and say v'dilma mafsik lo b'soir anasa b'chutz. The soir anasa b'chutz, right, which is part of the musaf, is something that's only mentioned in Pinchas. It's not mentioned here. It's a lot better to say that God did not write about something, but whatever was written is written in order, versus to change the order. Ubefrat, that we are saying that Shekola Parsha Kula Nemra Allah Seder. Why are we forced to make an exception? That's Gavaldik. So Amar Abaye, I'll tell you why. Because when you read Pasuk Chav Dalet, when it says V'yotza v'asa es oilosai, so this is mashma miyitzia rishoina avid ela ve'elayam. In other words, that this is the first time after his removal of the white garments, the first thing that he did was the oil. Now that's Gavaldik. Now, if you're going to insert over here the soid hanasa b'chutz, no. So then, and for that, you would put on the golden garments. And then you would have to put on the white garments to remove the kaf and the machta. Then he would remove the white garments to do the oilasei or oilasam. That will not be the first time, that will be the second time. That's one approach. Rava Amar, another proof that these two psukim have to be out of order, because it says in Pasuk Chav Gimel, Ufashat es bigdei habad, he removed his white garments. Oh, good. But then the Torah adds the words asher lavash, that he was wearing, shkoya. But you can only remove garments that you were wearing. If you're not wearing them, you cannot remove them. It's mamash expert. She'ein Talmud loimer asher lavash, but klum adam poishet elam asher lavash. Elam atam loimer asher lavash. Pasuk Chav Gimel Fakert is telling you that shelavash kvar. In other words, the removal of the linen begodim, right, is the second removal already. So Pasuk Chav Gimel is not that he put on the Big Day Loven like we mentioned, and he did everything in Big Day Loven, and then when he removed it, he went on. Even if you're going to add over here the Soid Hanasa Bachutz, no, there was Pasuk Chav Gimel means that this is the second time he's removing his white garments. That means there was some avodah that was done gold, and that avodah that was done in gold, we're going to say again is pasuk Chav Daled. Got it. So Rava is just proving you that it's out of the order. Okay, Maskev lo Rabba Barav Shilom. Here again, I get it that from the words Asher Lavash, pasuk Chav Gimel, there was a time prior to Chav Gimel that the white was already removed. But again, how do you know that it was pasuk Chav Daled? Making it out of order, so he also gave the same answer, that in Pasuk Chav Daled, when it says v'yotza v'asa, this is the very first avodah that the Kohen Gadol did, right after removing the white, which means not that he did asoir nasa b'chutz, because then this would have been the second avodah after the second change back again, and that's not the meaning of v'yotza and the first time was. Okay, so now that we established that the psukim are out of order, and we're not going to bring in here the Sorah Nasa B'chutz, this statement implies that other than verses 23, 24, everything else is in order, and it is not. And this is something that we never spoke about on Daf Lamed Beis at all. Frek the Gemara, the second to last narrow line, now again, if you have a chumash, let's move on. We're going to go now to Pasuk Chavei and Chavav and Chav Zayin and Chav Ches. So in Pasuk 25, Ve'eis Chelav Achatas Yakter HaMizbeach. And as we learned yesterday, the last year extensively, exactly like Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, we needed to go to the Tosefta, we needed to go to the Tanach Devei Shmuel, exactly when the Torah mentions in its order that what? That the Chalavim were burnt. We're speaking about the Chelav from the pod and the soil whose bloods were brought inside. Then in Pasuk 26, it says that the one who sent the soil to the Azazel becomes Tameh. Then in Pasuk 27, it says that the Parachatas and the Seirachatas has to be burnt. Now we got a problem. What's the problem? That in the Mishnah, it's reverted. The Mishnah mentions first the burning of the Sor and the Poer. Remember, it was burnt at the same time that the Kohen Gadol was reading from the Torah. You couldn't be in both places together. The burning of the Chelav was later. So this is another detail that in the Torah recorded it out of its chronological order. It says pasuk chav hey ve'es chela v'chatas yakter hamizbecha. Then it says in pasuk chav zayin. All right, we're going to skip pasuk chav for a moment. Then the Torah mentions the burning of the parachatos and the seirachatos outside Yerushalayim. Guys, remember the machlekes? Was it l'tzfayna? Was it l'mizracha? The Ilu Anantana, now look inside the oral Torah in the Seder of Mishnah is and Daf Samach Chesamid Beis. The Mishnah wrote that Haroyas Kohen Gadol Kishuhu Koira Ein Haroya Parvasoyer Hanasrav, because they were done at the same time. And the next statement is both according to Rabbi Eliezer. You don't have to have clear right now the details. Bein Rabbi Eliezer, Bein Rabbi Akiva, the burning of the Chalev happened later. The Ilu Emurei Chatos. Basi hacher maktelahu. So this is also out of order. Answers the Gemara. You're right. The Braisa never meant to say that the pasuk 23 and pasuk 24 are the only verses out of chronological order. No, the Braisa meant to say that when you begin Achrei Mois until verse 23, everything is in order. From here on, there could be other things that are out of order, and indeed this is out of order. Ema chutz mi pasuk zeh ve'elach. Now, just like we challenged on top of the Amid, how do you know 23 and 24 are out of order? The Gemara is going to have the same challenge, but it's going to be formulated beautifully. What was the kasha? That in the Mishnah wrote first that they would burn, then the Mishnah, even though the Mishnah never explicitly wrote about the burning of the Chalev, but we know from the Tosefta the Chalev was burnt later. So look at the irony. We have God's written Torah, we have Mishnayos. Somehow we're making the order in the Mishnah primary, and we're flipping over the Chumash. Why don't we take the opposite approach? This is one of the many sugyas where the Chazal point out clearly that the main Torah is the oral Torah. Indeed, our tradition of the Seder is what God told Moshe. Sometimes it's written in the Torah, and even if it's written in the reverse order, well, there's a reason for that, but we flip around the Torah in order to keep standing the oral Torah. And here we have over here. Why are you making the psukim, so to say, mistaken in order? Shabesh Masni, so say that the Mishnah did not record it properly. So Abaye is going to prove to you from the psukim that that's not the case. Because since it says, now we're going to go to pasuk 26. The pasuk all of a sudden speaks about the one who sent out the Soida Mishtaleach, how his garments and him become tummy. When it says, Vahamishtaleach, and then in pasuk 28, the pasuk is speaking about the ones who burnt the parachatos and the soirachatos, that they and their garments become pure. Now, I know it's not mamish juxtaposed, but the formulation of the verse is the same. We speak about the din of the hamishalayach, and then we speak about the din of the hasoyre. So we compare one to the other. Now, obviously, you can go in both directions, but we are picking dafka this direction, which is ma mishalayach, pasuk 26. The shiluach happened before the burning. The pasuk is simply going back regarding the one that sent the soil to the Azazel. He became tummy with his garments. In other words, mishaleach de mi'ikara. Mi'ikara meaning that, and this is important, verse 26 happened before verse 25. Right? Verse 25 says, burn the chalev. Verse 26, we know happened before. It happened, like we mentioned, when they sent to the many steps before. So when the Torah uses the word in pasuk 28 regarding the burning and therefore becoming tamei, it also means that it was burned prior to the emurim. Oh. So we are teaching the words in the pasuk. It's taka written out of order, but it must be prior. It must be prior. Pasuk 28 happened before pasuk 25. Says the Gemara, I get it that you are juxtaposing. And you're saying that the meaning of the Hamishaleach and the meaning of the Hasoyre means something that happened before already. Why? Because we are saying that Hasoyre should be like Mishaleach. Maybe Taich the opposite. Maybe Taich that, no, Hasoyre happened now, chronological order. And Hamishaleach happened now as well. Adarabba Masoyre the Hashtam. Now, meaning maybe Soyre happened after the Emurim. Let's keep the order of the Chumash intact. First, the emurim are burned, and then the animals are burned. And maybe Mishaleach also means the Hashtam. maybe they would only send the soid after burning the emurim. Now this is completely out of the order, but the Gemara says it can't mean, because the word the hamishaleach means something that had already happened, like Rashi writes 3 lines under the Gemara. And this happens very, very often in the Chumash, that when God is speaking about something and then he returns to a prior topic, he brings it up. We already mentioned the Soid HaMishtaleach before, not with all the details, that it's sent out to the desert. And now the Chumash goes back. So for sure, Pasuk 26 means something that had already happened. So we are able to touch Pasuk 28, prior, meaning prior to the Emurim. Okay. Rava says another proof that the Sa'ir was the sending of the Sa'ir took place before the Emurim, even though the Torah records the burning of the Emurim before Bahasher Leach, because since it says, and now we're going way back to Pasuk Yud, it says that the Sa'ir HaMishtaleach Yoma shall be stood alive. And ad how long do you have to keep him alive? And the answer is until when you get the atonement. And we all know already that atonement has to do with the service of blood, which is before the burning of the chalav. B'chlal by korbanos, if you never burnt the chalavim, even though you missed the mitzvah, but the kapara you receive. V'suloi, no, this is the greatest raya, the greatest proof that Pasuk 26 for sure happened before Pasuk 25. And if that's the case, we can say that Pasuk 28, which is about the burning of the pot and the soil, also happened before Pasuk 25, which is exactly the way it's recorded in the Mishnah. Again, that the Torah Shebal Peh is the Iker record of what God Almighty told Moshe Rabbeinu. And now some of it is written in the Torah clearly, some of it is written, but we have to change the order. Many dinim write the whole Mishnah and Chagiga, with all of the different categories. You have the gufei halachos, and you have the mountains hanging on a hair, and then you have oisius parchas ba'avir. That's the nature of how the Torah was written. Okay, moving on. We're after Yom Kippur already, in this part of the Gemara. Because the one that HaMishaleach, as we learned, he would walk back from the cliff to the sukkah closest to the cliff, and he would spend the rest of Yom Kippur there. After Yom Kippur, he wouldn't go straight home, or if he would go straight home, he would at one point close to the end of Yom Kippur need to go back to the Kohen Gadol who sent him to declare, I fulfilled the shlichus. Also, Mishaleach, when the Mishaleach is coming to make that declaration to the Kohen Gadol, so it depends. If Matzoy Bashuk, if he finds a Kohen Gadol in the market or in the street, in public, the Kohen Gadol, he would make this declaration, Ishi Kohen Gadol, my master Kohen Gadol, Asinu, we did shlichuscha. We did your shlichus. It's interesting, he says, we, even though it was only one person, but no, that's how we spoke. But if he finds a Kohen Gadol in private, so there is a lesser need, so to say, to honor the Kohen Gadol. So what he does is, he tells the Kohen Gadol, Machaye Chaim is a reference to God. God is the one that gives life to the living. The Ben Yehoyada says, Lapshad giving life to the living, it's connected to Yom Kippur. Because tzaddikim, even after the physical demise, are called alive. The opposite of tzaddikim, Rishoyim, Chazal say, Afilu b'chayim, Kuruyim, Mason. But if we're physically living, we can do tshuva. So what happens to all of us? On Yom Kippur, we get new life back. So after Yom Kippur, we refer to God as the one that gave life to the people that were only prior biological alive. Now they're beruchnius alive as well. We, not here is a we means you, the Kohen Gadol, and I, we fulfilled God's shlichus. It's very interesting. But in public, you don't have to care about the honor of God. Of course you do. But there it was correct to say, I did what you told me to do. In private, you acknowledge God. Now that we have as our expression that we call God Almighty the one who gives life to the living, so now we're going to go off on a tangent. Amar Rabba, that ki mifteri rabbanan mahadode b'pumpadisa, that when the chachamim would the chaverim, when they would go home and they would say goodbye to each other, leaving the yeshiva Pompadisa, Amri Hachi, this is what they would say. That machaye chayim, same expression. That the one who gives life to the living, yitan locha chayim, should give to you life which is long, and right chayim aruchim, and good life, v'toivim umisukanim, and well provided life. Now, what's pshat misukanim? So the Gemara explains. Pasuk in Tehillim writes that Esalach Bnei Hashem, David HaMelech is asking, let me walk in front of you, God, in the land of the living. And what does it mean in the land of the living? Amar Rav Yehuda, that means Zemakim Shuvakim. That David was davening that God should allow him to live in places where you have fast food. Pshat. In other words, when you live in a place where for you to eat, you have to spend a lot of time, and there's less time left to learn. And David HaMelech went through those periods. He lived in the desert and he was hiding. And he was a Yid, he learned Torah whenever he had a free moment. But how many free moments do you have? Imagine if you have to catch the chicken and shuck the chicken and fleck the chicken and then salt the chicken. No, like this. Makom Shvakim means I want to live in a place where all of my physical needs are readily available and accessible quickly in order for me to spend my time for that which is more important. Oh, so now that we mentioned that, now we'll go to a pasuk in Mishnah. It says in Mishlei Ke'oidech Yomim, that long days, ushnois chaim, and years of life and years of peace should be added to you. End of quote. Asks the Gemara, v'chi yeshanim shel chaim, v'yeshanim she'enim shel chaim. It's also connected to what's chaye ha'chaim. So Amar Rabbi Lazar, elu shnois shel adam. No, it is that way. This is like the years of a man, hamasapchois olav miralo toiva, that are transformed from bad to good. Rashi says that when a person, God forbid, goes through a not good time in life, but when you're in it, especially if you're younger, you don't have what to compare it to, that's what it is. But then if a person gets older and things get a lot better, they look back and they say, wow, now I became alive. So no matter what David HaMelech's matzav was, the bracha or mishlei, that we give a bracha for a person for him to have living years. Not that the years prior he's here, he was living, but the life, whatever life was, should get even a lot better. Continuing quoting from the pasuk initially, that a lechem ishim ekra, upon you, ishim l'chayra is the plural of men. Problem is that the plural of men should be anashim. So this word ishim is an anomaly. So here we have agadata. That the ishim that we are referring to is Talmidei Chachamim shedoimim lenashim. Fakir, not anashim. We are calling upon those that are like women. How are they like women? Rashi says the people that are not aggressive and they are physically weak. Right, the mice over there in Bava Metzia, right over Rabbi Reish Lakish, that he became weak. He took upon himself the yoke of Torah, the weak. And God willing, the ikar is to have good midas, as we're going to have on Daf Ayin Beis. Wow, it's going to be agadata, that we got to be non-aggressive people. So the oisim gevura ka'anashim, that the Torah is calling upon people that in certain aspects they're very weak. They're not anashim, they're ishim. But adarabah, they are the real men, because the ultimate strength is not of physical nature, but is and that's a character trait. That's also the precondition for us to connect to the godliness of learning. If a person wants to offer an asachin, and we're speaking about there's no Beis HaMikdash, so what should you do? Donate mashke for a fabrengen. And this is mamish the nesachin. Again, another agadata on this pasuk, and that's the meaning that alechem ishim ekra. So here the drush is that ishim doesn't mean men. Rashi says ishim is fire. Fire means a carbon. You know, it's providing. When you provide wine to a Talmud Chacham, that's as if you offered a libation, a sachem, to God Himself. Also connected to what we learned before, that he can tell the Kohen Gadol that I did your shlichus, and really, that's God's shlichus. It's not a contradiction. It's the Kohen Gadol was so bottled to Hashem that the shlichus of God is the mishaleach, and so is the Kohen Gadol. It's all one and the same. If a person sees that one of his children are getting weak in their connection to the Torah, what should you do to your son? This is such good advice. Yisa bas Talmud Chacham. Marry off your son to the daughter of a Talmud Chacham. No one will set your son straight better than his spouse to be. Now, of course, you're not fully in control. Halavai, I'm in control of myself. But the little control that we think we have, we should direct it to making sure that the family that the spouse of our sons come from are from families that they venerate and that they honor Yirah Shamayim, which is the real meaning here of Talmud Chacham. And then your son will be fine. The wife creates the environment in the home. And Shenemer, as it says from Iyuv, that im yaskin ba'aretz sharshoy, that where its root to become old in the ground, and ba'afer yamas gizoy, and its trunk is dying in the dirt. That's a remes to someone's child, God forbid, that's becoming weak in their connection to God Almighty. Daf ayin aleph amid beis. So what should you do? Meireyach mayim yafriya. From the smell of water, he should blossom. In other words, a child, a woman who comes from a home of Torah. So she has the reyach of Torah, like Rashi writes. And va'asar katzir k'maynata, and that the reyach is going to generate, it's going to generate branches like saplings. A whole new tree is going to grow out. Okay. And then the final statement we had in the Mishnah, and with this mamash we conclude the whole seder of Yom Kippur, that after Yom Tov, v'Yom Tov hoya oiselu yahavav, that he would make a Yom Tov, right? What was the words that we had in the Mishnah that we say in the davening, and v'shah sheyatza v'shalom min hakodesh. Now, says the Gemara Tanach Rabbanan, that Maisa b'Kohen Gadol echad. It happened once with the Kohen Gadol. Sheyatza m'beis hamikdash, that he exited the Beis Hamikdash. That's at the end of Yom Kippur, v'havuk ozli kula alma basrei, and everyone was following the Kohen Gadol. And by the way, this happened during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash. As we'll see, Shmai and Avatalion is from the era of the Zugais, which is Bisman by Yesheni. And not all the Kahanim Gedolim are great tzaddikim, but still, you have to give respect, show dignity to the office of the Kohen Gadol, and everyone followed them. But Kivan the Chazinu Shmai Avatalion, but when the Oilam and the people that were accompanying the Kohen Gadol, when they saw Shmai and Avatalion leaving their shul, they felt, correctly so, like we have, for example, in Hoydiyas Daf Yud Gimel, that a God-fearing person takes precedence even over a Kohen Gadol who's an Amaretz, who's not yet that God-fearing. So Shavku Lididei, people did not continue to follow the Kohen Gadol to go to his Fabrengen, Matzoi Yom Kippur, but they went to Shmai and Avatalion. And the Kohen Gadol felt slighted. And what did he do? So he attacked the person of Shmai and Avatalion. And as we know that Shmai and Avatalion, they were descendants of converts. So L'soif, at the end, what happened was that Shmai and Avatalion themselves felt that they have to go greet the Kohen Gadol. Everyone was with them. So they went, Ozu, Shmai, Avatalion, they were the leaders of the Jewish people. Li Pature Binei, the Kohen Gadol. They went to greet, to wish Agut Yom Tov, which is what we say, Matzah Yom Kippur. So Amar Lohem, and this was a cynical statement, that Yesun B'nei Amamin Lishlam, may the descendants of the nations, may the descendants of Gentiles be in peace. In other words, the Kohen Gadol reminded them that their yichus is that they're newcomers to the Jewish people. So Amrulei, so they both responded to the Kohen Gadol that indeed Yesun B'nei Amamin Lishlam, may the descendants of converts, they will indeed live in peace. You know why? Because the Avdin Uvda de Aharon, because they follow the path of Aaron HaKohen, which Rashi reminds us from Pirkei Avos that he was a Roid of Shalom. Shmai and Avatalion went out of their way to greet the Kohen Gadol when they realized that too many people left the entourage of the Kohen Gadol to come to them of no fault of their own. So they did a step to bring peace. And they added V'lo Yesi bar Aharon l'shlam, but even a descendant of the best yichus. You can be Gesha, you can be Spitz Chabad, right? You're a descendant of Aaron. But if you're not behaving in the path of Aaron, such a person will not have the peace that everyone so much desires to have. Wow, a very sharp word from them. Okay, Chavra Atkan, Seder of Yom Kippur. We have two more daf in Perek Shvi, and these are phenomenal. We're going to have a lot now about the people that are in the Shmata business. They're going to love it. But I want to say daf ayin beis on the beis, some very, very important agadah. And as we get into the 8th chapter, we're going to go into the halachas of Yom Kippurim with the 5 inuyim as we will see just in a couple of days. So let's start with the final Mishnah of this page. Says the Mishnah. This is a general statement. Kohen Gadol mishamesh b'shmoina kelim. The Kohen Gadol can only do the service when he's wearing 8 kelim. It's interesting just to point out, yes, kelim is sometimes used as it is for garments, but kelim is a much broader statement. And there's a lot of Hasidus here without any doubt. When we know that al pi Hasidus, what levushim are, machshava dibur u'maisa, and when we start speaking about how every strand and every thread was made out of, every thread is made out of 6 strands or out of 8 strands, out of 12 strands, out of 24 strands, all of this has, you mamish can smell its inner significance, but let's get the words over here. So here the words are, he wore 8 kelim. Contrasting the Kohen Gadol with the Kohen Hedyot, the common Kohen only wore the 4 begadim. Tosfos already points out that even though it says in Pirkei Avos that the Chacham goes al Rishon, Val Achrein, Achrein, that's not the consistent seder in the Mishnah. Sometimes, like over here, right? If you would have gone Rishon, Achrein, then you would have mentioned first the 8 begadim of the Kohen Gadol, and then the 4 of the Kohen Hedyot. Here, the Mishnah first unpackages the latter statement. And only then does it go back to the first, but there's a reason for that. Because, and as we'll see, and the reason is because the Kohen Gadol didn't wear 8 garments completely unrelated to the 4 of the Kohen Hedyot. He wore those 4 of the Kohen Hedyot plus another 4. So therefore, to describe the Kohen Gadols, you have to describe the Kohen Hedyots. So here you're going out of the order of Rishon. Another nuance, and that is not exactly. We already learned many times the machloikes, whether the gartel of the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedyot was the same. They were both called avneit, but if you're going to hold the Kohen Gadol's avneit, for sure had shatnez. Many people hold that the Kohen Hedyots did not have shatnez. Also, the hat or the turban that both the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedyot wore was not laying on their head the same way, and the Torah gives it different words, as we'll see in a moment here in the Mishnah and in the Gemara, and we'll quote a few psukim. But generally, like the Mishnah says, the 8 begadim of the Kohen Gadol were generally the 4 of the Kohen Hedyot plus another 4. So let's go first now to the 4 of the Kohen Hedyot. Ketoinus, which is the tunic. Then the Mishnah writes the Michnasayim. I want to point out that we learned in Yoma that the first that he put on was the Michnasayim. So clearly the Mishnah is not writing the order as he would wear them. But on the other hand, you can argue that the Michnasayim was more of a negative nature, to cover one's nakedness. And the Ketoinus was already to give the cover to Tiferes. So, Shur Meirav, Asay Toiv, maybe here the say that is, first the positive and then the negative. Then the Mishnah says Snefis, which is the turban. And it was taller, pointier, in contrast to the Kohen Gadol, whose turban was called Migba'as. But anyways, Va'avneit and the Gartel. Says the Mishnah, Moisev all of Kohen Gadol, on top of these 4, the Kohen Gadol had another 4. The Choshen is what we will call the breastplate. The Ephod, which is the apron type of garment. The Me'il is a robe, it's that golden plate that the Kohen Gadol wore on his forehead. Now, aside of him wearing these 8, according to most of the Shainim, there was something else that was put inside the Choshen, and that is the Urim and the Tumim. Let's understand that that was either a piece of parchment or it was a golden thin tablet that had on it engraved, or parchment that had on it written Shem Ab and other godly holy names, and there was a pocket inside the Choshen in which it was inserted. This is important because even though the Urim and Tumim were not found in the second Beis Hamikdash, but a Kohen Gadol can only do the Avodah when he's wearing the Shmoineh Begadim. So in the second Beis Hamikdash, without doubt, we had this at the end of Soita and in other places. All of these 8 we had up until the end of Churban Bayeshem. Now we have a tradition that the Choshen Mishpat, which was all stolen by the Romans, so one Ganav stole from the other. It's somewhere in the Oxford Museum in England, the Choshen Mishpat. And there's a story of the Baralmi Prague, how there was once a caretaker that he stole the stones by making fake copies and replacing them. And the Maral of Prague, when he was younger, Baruch HaKodesh, he went there, and there's an unbelievable story written by the Frierdiker Rebbe, how he inspired him to replace that which he took. But let's go back over here. Now, Be'elu Nishalim, but what of it? Only when the Kohen Gadol is wearing all the Shemaim Begadim were we allowed to ask questions to the Kohen Gadol, but that was called the request of the Urim V'Tumim. And Bekitzer, what happened is that there was a specific positionings of the one who's asking and the Kohen Gadol. A question was asked. Not any question is allowed to be asked, as we'll see in the Mishnah. But whenever one was allowed to ask the question, he needed to be wearing the Shemaim Begadim. And in the Choshen Mishpat, you had the names of the Shvatim engraved and other words engraved. So you had the letters of the Aleph base, not in order, but you had all the letters of the Aleph base. And miraculously, there was some sort of lighting up of, or some sort of protrusion of, something very unusual happened to the letters that formed the response. And the Kohen Gadol needed to be divinely inspired to know how to put the letters together and how to get the correct answer. We just learned recently that Nafal Piska min Hashamayim Emes. So also many times the Piska, or when it comes to Shailas Cholim and all of these mystical techniques, in many cases the response only comes in the form of letters, Rashi Tevisin, and you have to have some real Ruach HaKodesh to know what those letters mean. You know, the Gra's famous statement that Eli confused the Chana being shikr is because the letters of Keshera and Shikoira are the same letters. That was an ayah that the letters light up and you have to know how to formulate them. And the Rebbe explains that he never thought that she was really shikr, but she was davening like someone who's shikr, which is a completely supra-rational way of praying. And Eli never saw someone praying that way. Until then, there's a seder and pray. You have to speak to God respectful. You can't say that I'm so intimate and close to God, I can just say my heart. No, there's a seder. First, you have to say shvach, and then you have to ask questions, and then you have to think. And no, and she innovated, and she was revealed that if a person is connected to their Yechida Shabbat Nefesh, then there is no seder and prayer. You don't have to praise first. You don't have to thank first. You can ask something many times. Normally, you can't repeat something twice. It's not respectful. Make your petition. You would ask with all your heart once. Don't be a nudnik. Repeat. But Chana, that's the whole part of Kishikoida. That's really that he wasn't even sure, but he said the emes. She told him that davening like a shikoida is good. It's ksheira. Anyway, it's coming back over here. So first of all, Urim V'Tumim only works when you're wearing the Shemaim Begadim. Number 2 says the Mishnah. The Nishalom Elo, the question can only be about a king, or regarding the Av Beis Din, or Ulamisha Hatzibur Tzarach Boi, and not a private individual, even if you have access to the Kohen Gadol. We are very careful for what are we going to use this miraculous Urim V'Tumim, a lot more in the Gemara. But let's begin. So Tanach Rabbanon, the Gemara quotes a Brais. And the Gemara makes the Baraisa says like this: that dvarim shenemar behem sheish. Whenever the Torah uses the words sheish for linen, and like we mentioned in the intro, that in Lashon HaKodesh, linen is sometimes called bad. We have butz, we have pishtan, and we have sheish. When the Torah writes sheish, there's a reason for that. Sheish is the remez that linen thread is composed of 6 smaller linen strands. Chutan kaful shisha, right, doctor? We went through this already with the tzitzis. I pointed out that the tzitzis is kaful shmeina, but it's not even kaful shmeina directly. You have 4 and 4, and then they're twined together. Each one of your tzitzis you'll see that. But we're speaking about the following, as we'll learn. It's fascinating that the threads that were used to make the begadim, sometimes we only used 3 types of threads. Normally, whenever there was wool, so you had chelis wool, and you had algaman wool, and you had the red toilashani wool, and sometimes, especially by the begadim of the Kohen Gadol, there was also linen threads. Each one of the threads was comprised of 6 strands. But let's begin with the linen one. Whenever God uses the word sheish, it means that strand, really, that thread was made out of 6 strands. Whenever the Torah adds and uses the words mashazad, which means literally that it was twined. So that means that it was made out of 8 strands, not 6, but 8. The me'il, the robe, was made out of, each thread was made out of 12 strands. Now, just to know, the me'il was pure tchelis wool. So aside of the weaving it together, you weave with threads. Every thread was made out of 12. And the paroiches, we're speaking specifically about the paroiches that divided between the holy and the holy of holies. And by Yesheni, Achloikis Tanoim, whether there was one or two, Esrim Ba'arbon. And the final one, the Choishin and the Ephod, right? They were woven together from threads. Each thread had in it 28. Wow. It just means that the threads were relatively thick. It took a lot of know-how to make a proper beged, which they did. And no, it wasn't hard like felt. That was only the gartel. The other begadim of the Kohen Gadol were takabanafied shatnas because they were comfortable. They didn't only keep out the cold, but they retained the heat, etc. That's the end of the Braisa. And let's see how far down we can get. Let's go to the end of the Amid to see how does the Braisa know that. So when it says that whenever God uses the word sheish, said the Braisa chutan kaful shisha. How do you know that? Minolon, because the Amar Kron, this is the pasuk that we have towards the end of Pekudei, when we're putting everything together, and it says Vayasu esak kosle sheish, that we made the tunics that were made out of linen, and the mitznefesin, right, the turbans made out of linen, vespa'are hamigbois, and the adorning hats. Here you have it. It's also mitznefes, but this is for the Kohen Gadol. So whenever you're speaking about the hat of the Kohen Hedyot, it's called, like we have in our Mishnah, mitznefes. Whenever we're speaking about the hat of the Kohen Gadol, it's called migbois. Here the pasuk speaks about both sheish, linen. The esmichna say abad, and the breeches. Bad is linen. Bad sheish mashuzar. Now, if we're going to count bad, here's Kevin with the pictures, as linen, which it is. So the Torah mentions 5 times linen. Now, 1 is not extra because God could have named all the garments that they should make. The kosnois and the mitznefes and the mikbois, right? And the mechmasayim, sheish or bad. Not, why did Hashem have to write after every one that it has to be made out of linen? And not only that, but by the last one, it says bad sheish. So there's a total of 5 linens that are mentioned. So 1 has to be mentioned because we want to make it clear that the only thread that was used for these garments was linen, fine. But now you have 4 extra. So chad the gufei that wad the kitananino, that it has to be out of linen. Now, by the way, how do we know that sheish is linen? We'll get there in a moment. V'chad, now we have 4 more. So 1 is sheyehei chutan kaful shisha, dafka dispasik. That 1 time called linen with the word bad. So why are we calling it sheish? To tell you that sheish means linen, but it's a type of linen that 1 thread is made out of 6 strands. No, the other one means sheyehei shazurim. They have to be spun together. So the 6 became 1. V'chad is l'sha'ar begadim sholei never behem sheish. So it's, you would think that only where God called linen sheish do you have to have each thread made out of 6 strands. No, all the other garments have to have the 6 into 1, and the final one, which is the 4th, you can say v'chad, is to tell you that this isn't only as a preference, as a mitzvah, right? But this is something that's essential. Now we have to take a step back. Gemara says, how do you know sheish means linen? So Amar Rabbi Yosi ben Rab Chanina, because since the Amar Krab bad, here we are going back bad sheish. So we know that it's bad. Bad means linen. Why does bad mean linen? Because the bad davar ha'olam min akarka bad. It means something that grows out of the ground, individual stalks, like a tree has branches. So one becomes many. But linen taked comes out of the ground in individual stalks. So bad means lavad, alone. Asks the Gemara, hold on, maybe it means wool, right? From every pore of the skin of the animal comes out 1 thread. The 1 thread doesn't branch into 20 threads either. The Ema Amara, says the Gemara, that's not true. That Amara ifatzule miftzilom, that wool, what happens is that it splits into 2. Hairs split, and when a hair splits into 2, you end up 1 pore with 2 hairs or 2 half hairs. That's not alone. Bad bevad means alone. I kitana nami ifatzuli mafatzil. I linen, when you beat it in the process of making what comes out of the ground, the flax, into proper threads, you beat it and you break them down, you split them. So the Gemara says, of course, you split them, they don't split naturally. It says kitana agav lukusei mafatzil. Linen will only split because you're beating it. But wool is not bad because naturally many hairs split down the middle. That's one raya that since here sheish and bad are interchanged, bad means linen, sheish means linen. Another answer, Ravina Amar, I'll tell you how I know sheish is linen, because it says in Yecheskel clearly, Pa'are pishtim yiu al roisham. There it says clearly, now pishtim we know means linen. Umichnasei pishtim yiu al mosneim. No, it's in Yecheskel we find the Torah calling the material of these garments as pishtan. So in the Chumash, when it says sheish, it means pishtan. Amalei Ravashi. What about before Yecheskel? Hamekami the Asi Yecheskel manamar. In other words, I don't like that you're bringing me a proof from Yecheskel and before Yecheskel was written. How would we know it? And the Gemara rejects that point. That's not a valid point. Ula Taimech, are you telling me that we can't use the Nevi'im as a clarification to something that's used in the Torah? It's not true. There's something that is not written in the Torah of Moshe, but we know it. And what is that? It says in Yecheskel that kol ben necha v'aral leiv v'aral basar, that if someone is uncircumcised, lo yavei al mikdashi, he cannot even as a kohen do the avodah. Think about it. In the Chumash, we have many other blemishes, Parshas Emoed, that disqualify a kohen from doing the avodah. In the Chumash and the Chamisha Chumshe Torah, never do we have this mention that if he's uncircumcised, he can't do the avodah. We know this from Yecheskel ben Buzi. You can ask the same kasha. But Hamekama the Asi Yecheskel manamar, before Yecheskel, no one knew that. Of course, we knew that. Ella Gemara Gemidala. Again, Torah Shabbal Peh. Torah Shabbal Peh is rooted in our tradition. This is what we learned from our teachers, Moshe from Sinai. Elama, until Yecheskel, it was never written down. Yeah, and now came Yecheskel, Va'asi Yecheskel, Va'asmecha Akra. So Hachinami, Ravina stands with his answer. I find in Yecheskel that Yecheskel calls the material of the big day kohuna pishtan, and we know that means linen. The fact that in Torah Moshe it's called sheish or called bad, that Yecheskel is megale what it means in the Chumash. Hachinami, Gemara Gemira. How do we know when Moshe came and he said sheish? Aside of the words that he wrote in the Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu told our Zaydis in the desert linen, and they used linen. Narvos then v'asi Yecheskel v'asmecha akra. Sheish is linen, so therefore, whenever the Torah uses the word sheish, it means not only a linen thread, that every linen thread should be made out of 6 strands that are twined together. Then the Baraisa went on to say that whenever the Chumash uses the word mashazar, twined, then every thread is comprised out of 8 strands. Minalon, where do we get that from? Says the Gemara, also from Pikodei, when it says Vayasu al Shulei Hami'il. Here we are focusing specifically on the me'il of the Kohen Gadol, that they made upon the ends of the robe. They made pomegranates. Now they were made out of material. And what types of threads went into the making of these pomegranates? The Torah mentions 3. The Remoinim were not shatnez. The Remoinim were only made out of wool, but the Torah specifies 3 types of wool, as it does in many of the begadim and in the materials of the Mishkan. Chelis wool, dyed with the chilazim. Argamon is a purple wool. And many people that say that they know for sure what the chelis is, what the chilazim is, take. If you don't know what you're doing, sometimes the product, the end result will be purple. And only when you know what you're doing is it blue. Like the yam, like the rakia, like the kisei yaakov. And then there is a certain type of red dye that made the wool red, and that's called Torah Shan. So the Torah specifies 3 colors of woolen threads, and here the Torah uses the words mashazar, twined. Oh, so since we find the word twined over here by the Remoinim, so says the Baraisa, let us now learn the Yalef mashazar mi paroiches. The paroiches we know was made out of 24 strands, Now, I just want to take a step back. How do we know that the Perechus was made out of 24 strands? Because the Torah says that the Perechus was made out of Tchelas, Argom, Telah Shani, and Sheish. And we already established that Sheish doesn't only mean linen, but it's a linen that every thread has 6 strands. That wasn't only for the linen. All the other ones were also made out of 6. So if you have 4 types, right, linen, Tchelas, Argom, and Telah Shani, and each one is made out of 6. So 4 times 6 is 24. So just like the Perechus had a total of 24, Yechap knows each one they took 6 strands and they made it into linen. 6 made it into chelas. 6, and then they took all that and they made it into one thread. Is each one thread had in it 24. So mashazar, afkan. Now the Remoinim didn't have 4 types. The Remoinim didn't have linen. They only had chelas, argam, and telah shani. But we want to come to the same total, 24. Now 24 divided by 3 is 8. For you to come to the same total number of strands. Afkan esrim ba'arba. In other words, the habakol chad v'chad. If you're going to have 24, but you're not using linen, you're not using 4, you're only using 3, each one is only going to have 8. Gzeira shava, mashas on mashas. Now the Gemara challenges. Hold on. Why don't we learn Rimoinim from the Choshen and the Ephod? Same mashazar, mashazar. Now the Choshen and the Ephod, we know the Braisa said it had 28 strands. We'll speak about that later in the next year. But let's go back. So if they had 28, why don't we say that what? That the Rimoinim had 28. Now, by the way, how would you make that? How would you divide 28 into 3? You can't do that. The Gemara is going to say that in a moment. You cannot do it. You cannot do it uniformly. But it's 9.3. But you can do 9, 9, and 10. But the Kash maybe that had 28. Why don't we say Afkan Esan V'Shmoina? So the Gemara answers first, no. Danin davar shalei nemer by zahav. By the Rimoinim, there was no golden strands in it. From something else, which is the Perechus shalei nemer by zahav. And that's la afuke choshen and the ephod that they would have in it golden strands. Says the Gemara Adarabba. I mean, you're finding one dissimilarity. Let me find an opposite dissimilarity. Done and beged me beged. At least if you're going to learn the Rimoin, which is part of the Me'il, it's by default more similar to the choshen and to the ephod because they are garments. The Perechus is not a garment. Lafuke Perechus, it's an oil. Indeed. So, there's one advantage here, there's one advantage there, so they cancel each other out. Ella, we learn the Rimoinim from the Avneit, the belt of the Kohen Gadol, for sure had shatnez. Shatnez means it had all 4 types. And the linen, again, is sheish. Sheish doesn't only mean linen, but it means that each one was made out of 6. Each one out of 6. So the tchelas, argam, and telah shani, also each one 6. 4 times 6 is 24. So they had 24. The Rimoinim also had a total of 24 strands. But by the Rimoinim, there was only 3, not 4. So 24 divided by 3 is 8. And now it's perfect. V'danin beged, v'davar shalei nemer by zahav, mi beged, and v'davar shalei nemer by zahav. So they are more similar. Ve'ein danin davar she'ein by zahav, v'davar she'esh by zahav. Givaldik. Now, Mari Amar, another reason why we don't learn the Rimoinim from the choshen and the ephod, by saying if they had 28, somehow there should be 28 in the Rimoinim, because since by the choshen the Torah says make it like the ephod, the Torah is saying that the only thing that's like the ephod is the choshen and nothing else, meaning not the Rimoinim. Tasenu ksiv, tasenu is written by the choshen. Tasenu lezev v'lo la'achar. Rav Ashi gives another approach that regarding the Rimoinim it says ve'osisa ksiv, which means shiur kol asiyois of shavos, that every one of the tchelas, argaman and telah shani, should be the same type of thread. And like we mentioned, you cannot divide 28 into 3 in a uniform way. It's going to be 9 and a fraction. It's not going to work. Hey, what should we do? That each one of the 3 should have 10 strands in it. Well, you can have 30, not 28. That's what I have a little tulasa. Well, the option will be that 2 out of the 3 should be made out of 9. 9 and 9 is 18. And then one of them should be out of 20. Well, then they're not all uniform. Amar Kra, you can't say that because it says in the pasuk Asisa, which means Sheyu Kral Asiyois of Shavos, and therefore, at least now we got clarity that whenever God says Mashazar, we learn that word from the Rimoinim. By the Ramayanim, it must be that Mashuzad is like the ultimate answer was like the Ephod, meaning that each thread had 8 strands. So now we have Sheish is 6, Mashuzad is 8, and where we left off, God willing to be continued, that Me'il is 12, Paroiches is 24, and the Choshen and Ephod is 28 to be continued.
Thank you, Rabbi.
That's the meaning of that. We'll see a few words tomorrow.
Have a safe trip.
Thank you, Baruch. Inside the Rashi, right? That's a big topic. The Rashi writes over here. Ben gave it. I have to look into that.